Supercommunicators. This video is based on key insights from the book Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg. The 3 kinds of conversation. Charles Duhigg begins by pointing out just how much we talk. We're always communicating, not just with people face-to-face, but through texts, emails, and even little signals like smiles. It's a constant flow of information, a sort of air we all share. But Duhigg quickly notes that not all talking is the same. Some conversations feel amazing, like a light bulb went off, and you truly understand someone. Others, they're frustrating and leave you feeling confused and disconnected. Think about a time you tried to explain something important to a friend, but it felt like they just weren't getting it. That's the kind of conversation Duhigg is talking about. The author emphasizes that good conversation isn't just about chatting. It's about building connections. Oscar Wilde believed that conversation is the heart of any strong relationship, whether it's with a spouse or a best friend. But Duhigg explains that these connections don't happen automatically. Our brains are actually wired to want to connect with others, but we need to understand how communication works to make that happen. It's like wanting to build with Legos. You need to know how the bricks fit together. Duhigg suggests that successful communication relies on being on the same page as the person you're talking to. Both people need to be trying to have the same kind of conversation at the same time. For example, if someone is sharing a sad story, they probably want empathy and a listening ear, not a quick fix or advice. If you jump in with solutions when they just want to be heard, the conversation will likely fall flat. It's like trying to dance with someone who's leading and you're following, or vice versa. It's messy if you're not in sync. The author clarifies that supercommunicators aren't naturally gifted speakers. Instead, they've simply put more thought into how conversations unfold. They understand the many choices we make during a dialogue that can either bring us closer or push us further apart. Duhigg believes that by learning to recognize these opportunities, we can all become better at speaking and listening, and ultimately, at connecting with others. It's about being aware of the little moments in a conversation where you can choose to understand, empathize, or clarify, instead of just reacting. Chapter 1: The Matching Principle. Charles Duhigg begins by telling the story of Jim Lawler, a CIA case officer who struggled with recruiting spies. Despite a strong desire to serve his country, Lawler consistently failed to connect with potential agents, fearing he'd be fired. This sets the stage for exploring why truly connecting with someone through conversation is so difficult, yet so powerful. Duhigg explains that the CIA actually prioritizes communication skills above all else, teaching officers to build rapport and trust. Believing a genuine connection is the key to gaining valuable intelligence. It's not about sneaking around in the shadows, but about building relationships. Duhigg then dives into the science behind why some people are naturally better at connecting than others. He introduces Bo Sivers, a researcher who discovered that when people truly connect during a conversation, their brains actually begin to synchronize. This means their brain activity, breathing rates, and even heartbeats start to align. This synchronization isn't just a feeling, it's a measurable neurological event. Studies showed musicians playing together, or people listening to a story, experience this brain alignment. The more synchronized the brains, the better the communication. However, Sivers' research revealed that simply having a strong personality or being a good leader doesn't guarantee this connection. Instead, he identified high centrality participants, people who effortlessly facilitate conversation by asking questions, acknowledging others' feelings, and adapting their communication style to match those around them. These individuals don't dominate the conversation. They create space for others to share and feel heard. They're like conversational chameleons, subtly mirroring the mood and energy of the group. Duhigg illustrates this with an example of a group discussing a confusing movie clip, where the high centrality participant encouraged others to share their thoughts and validated their perspectives. Duhigg explains that effective communication isn't just about what you say, but how you say it, and crucially, recognizing what kind of conversation is happening. He breaks down conversations into 3 main types: decision-making, What's this really about? Emotional, how do we feel? And social, who are we? Each type engages different parts of the brain. Miscommunication often happens when people are operating in different conversational modes. For example, offering a practical solution when someone just needs to vent is a common misstep. Duhigg emphasizes the matching principle. To connect, you need to recognize the type of conversation happening and adjust your communication style accordingly. The author returns to Jim Lawler's story to demonstrate this principle in action. Lawler's initial attempts to recruit Yasmin failed because he focused on the task at hand, recruiting a spy, rather than building a genuine connection. He revealed his CIA affiliation too soon, scaring her away. It wasn't until he opened up about his own vulnerabilities and anxieties, sharing his feelings of inadequacy and uncertainty, that Yasmin began to trust him. He stopped trying to get something from her and started simply connecting with her. This shift in approach, this matching of emotional honesty, allowed Yasmin to feel safe enough to consider helping him. Duhigg concludes by highlighting that the ability to connect is a skill that can be learned and practiced. Lawler eventually became a successful recruiter by mastering the art of synchronization. The CIA now incorporates these techniques into its training, teaching officers to listen actively, validate emotions, and adapt their communication style. Ultimately, Duhigg argues, the power of communication lies in its ability to create genuine human connection, a connection that can unlock trust, understanding, and even cooperation. It's a skill that benefits not just spies, but anyone who wants to build stronger relationships and navigate the complexities of human interaction. A Guide to Using These Ideas, Part 1. Charles Duhigg begins by explaining that truly great communicators, people who are good at getting their ideas across and building strong relationships, share some surprising habits. They don't just jump into a conversation talking about what they want to discuss. Instead, they take the time to figure out what kind of conversation everyone else wants to have. It's like they're detectives, looking for clues about what's important to the people they're talking to. Duhigg points out that we often assume others see the world the same way we do. But that's not true. Someone might want to talk about feelings while you want to solve a problem. Or maybe you want to share a funny story, but your friend needs to vent about a bad day. If you're not on the same page about the type of conversation, it's hard to really connect. This is where the idea of a learning conversation comes in. The first rule of a learning conversation, according to Duhigg, is to pause and ask yourself, why am I speaking up right now? It sounds simple, but it's powerful. Before you say anything, think about what you hope to achieve and how you want to say it. For example, you might want to ask a friend about going on vacation, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't pressure them. Or, if your sibling is upset, you might wonder if they want advice or just someone to listen. Duhigg shares a fascinating story about investment bankers who often got into heated arguments at work. Researchers asked them to write down one sentence before each meeting, stating their goal for the discussion. It didn't take long, and people didn't always share their sentences aloud. But just thinking about their goals made a huge difference. Arguments decreased, and people felt more satisfied because they understood each other better. It showed that knowing what kind of conversation you're aiming for helps you communicate more clearly and listen more effectively. We don't need to write down sentences before every chat, Duhigg clarifies. But taking a moment to consider your intentions is a good habit, especially in important conversations. Pay attention to the other person's cues. Are they emotional? Are they focused on details? What topics do they bring up? These clues can tell you what kind of conversation they're hoping for. Duhigg uses the example of teachers asking students, do you want to be helped, hugged, or heard? This question isn't about the specific action, but about understanding what the student needs from the conversation. It's a way of asking, what kind of conversation are you looking for? Duhigg emphasizes that when we ask someone what they need, we encourage a learning conversation, a dialogue where everyone feels understood and valued. Often, we naturally have these learning conversations with close friends and family. We just know what they need without having to ask. But the most important conversations, the ones that really matter, aren't always easy. That's when we need to be more mindful and intentional about creating a space for genuine understanding. Ultimately, Duhigg argues, a learning conversation is about paying attention, listening closely, speaking openly, and sharing what's truly on your mind. It's about building connections by showing that you genuinely want to understand the other person. The "what's this really about" conversation. Charles Duhigg explains that starting a conversation can be surprisingly tricky. It's like a quick series of decisions we make without even thinking much about them. Should we be serious or funny? Is it okay to jump in and say something, or should we wait? Are we making a good impression? Because these things happen so fast, it's easy to miss important clues or not notice what people aren't saying. This is where what Duhigg calls the "what's this really about" conversation comes in. This isn't a conversation with actual words at first, but more of an unspoken understanding. It has two main jobs. First, it helps everyone figure out what they actually want to talk about, what each person hopes to get out of the discussion. Imagine a group trying to plan a weekend trip. One person might want to relax on a beach, while another wants to go hiking. The "what's this really about" part is figuring out those different needs before they start arguing about destinations. Second, it's about agreeing on how the conversation will work, what the rules are, and how they'll make decisions together. Will everyone get a chance to speak? Will they try to find a solution everyone agrees on, or will someone decide? Duhigg points out that this "what's this really about" conversation doesn't always happen right at the beginning. It can pop up in the middle of a discussion, especially when people start talking about plans or weighing pros and cons. Think about a team deciding on a project. They might start talking about details, but then realize they haven't agreed on the overall goal. That's when they need to step back and have a "what's this really about" moment. The author emphasizes that every conversation has a hidden negotiation going on, and the goal isn't to win, but to understand what everyone wants so they can have a meaningful discussion. Without this initial understanding, conversations can easily go off track. Duhigg suggests we've all been in those frustrating talks where everyone talks at each other instead of with each other, or where the discussion wanders all over the place. It's like trying to build something without a blueprint. The key, according to Duhigg, is learning to recognize when this "what's this really about" conversation is starting, and then knowing how to guide it so everyone feels heard and understood. This ability to connect through words, to truly understand what others are trying to say, and what they aren't saying, is a powerful skill, a kind of superpower in how we interact with the world. Chapter 2. Every conversation is a negotiation. Charles Duhigg begins by illustrating a fascinating scene. A jury deliberating the fate of Leary Reed, a man caught with a firearm despite a past felony conviction. This isn't just a legal drama, Duhigg explains, but a prime example of how every conversation, even one with life-altering consequences, is fundamentally a negotiation. The jurors aren't simply deciding guilt or innocence. They're negotiating what to talk about, how to talk about it, and ultimately, how to reach a decision together. This initial, often subconscious, dance of establishing conversational rules is something we all participate in constantly, whether we realize it or not. Duhigg points out that conversations don't just start, they're carefully built. We subtly signal our intentions through tone, body language, and initial remarks, testing the waters to see what topics are acceptable and how we're expected to behave. Think about starting a conversation with your parents about a bad grade. You likely wouldn't jump straight to blaming the teacher. Instead, you might start with a hesitant, "I wanted to talk about my math test," gauging their reaction before revealing the full story. This is a mini negotiation, establishing the boundaries of the conversation. The author explains that a key part of this negotiation is figuring out what everyone wants from the conversation. These desires aren't always stated directly. They're revealed through offers, invitations, and subtle refusals. Imagine planning a weekend trip with friends. Someone suggests camping, Another proposes a city visit. These are offers, revealing underlying desires for adventure versus relaxation. The conversation unfolds as everyone subtly communicates their needs and preferences. Duhigg emphasizes that once we understand these underlying desires, a more meaningful dialogue can begin. To illustrate this concept, Duhigg shares the story of Dr. Bayfar Adea, a surgeon who realized he was failing to connect with his prostate cancer patients. He was presenting them with data and medical options, assuming they wanted objective advice. However, he discovered his patients were grappling with deeper concerns: family, mortality, quality of life. They weren't seeking information. They were seeking reassurance, understanding, and a way to make a decision aligned with their values. Dr. Adea's mistake was assuming he knew what his patients wanted, instead of asking open-ended questions to uncover their true needs. Duhigg introduces the work of Roger Fisher and the Harvard Negotiation Project, who revolutionized the understanding of negotiation. They argued that successful negotiations aren't about winning, but about expanding the pie, finding solutions that benefit everyone involved. This interest-based bargaining involves understanding the other party's underlying interests, not just their stated positions. It's about asking why repeatedly to uncover the true motivations. The author explains that this principle applies to everyday conversations. We often test conversational boundaries by introducing new topics or shifting our tone, observing how others respond. This is a form of experimentation, seeking to establish shared rules for the discussion. If you're arguing with a friend and suddenly crack a joke, you're testing whether they're open to a lighter approach. Their reaction will tell you whether to continue with humor or return to a more serious tone. Duhigg returns to the jury deliberation, highlighting how juror John Bowley skillfully navigated this negotiation. Bowley didn't immediately take a side. Instead, he asked questions, actively listening to understand each juror's perspective and what they needed from the conversation. He recognized that some jurors wanted logical arguments, while others sought emotional resonance. By adapting his approach, Bowley created space for a more productive dialogue. The author explains that there are two main types of logic at play in conversations: the logic of costs and benefits, rational analysis, and the logic of similarities, emotional connection. Successful communicators recognize which logic is dominant and adapt their approach accordingly. If someone is sharing a personal story, responding with data and statistics will likely fall flat. Instead, empathy and shared experiences are more persuasive. Ultimately, Duhigg concludes, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, not guilty, because Bowley facilitated a negotiation where everyone felt heard and understood. He helped them move beyond their initial positions to explore the deeper values and concerns at stake. This story and the examples Duhigg provides demonstrate that effective communication isn't just about what we say, but about how we listen, how we understand, and how we create a space for meaningful connection. It's a superpower that allows us to navigate complex situations, build stronger relationships, and achieve outcomes that benefit everyone involved. A guide to using these ideas, Part 2. Charles Duhigg begins by exploring a surprising idea. Most of us aren't very good at understanding what others really want to talk about. He describes a Harvard study where people had conversations, trying to steer them towards topics they cared about. The surprising result: their conversation partners often missed the signals, leaving people feeling unheard and the discussions unsatisfying. It's not that people weren't trying to communicate their interests, but rather that we aren't naturally tuned to pick up on the subtle clues others give us. Think about a time you tried to talk about something important, but the other person kept changing the subject. It's frustrating, right? This study shows that's a common experience. Duhigg explains that successful conversations aren't just about talking. They're about a quiet negotiation to figure out what everyone wants to discuss. He uses the example of a doctor, Dr. Adea, who skillfully guided patients to reveal their true concerns by asking open-ended questions. This highlights a key skill: asking questions that go beyond simple yes or no answers. instead of asking, "Did you sleep well?" A better question might be, "What was your sleep like last night?" The latter invites a more detailed response, revealing what's truly on the person's mind. The author emphasizes the importance of preparation before a conversation. It's not about scripting everything you'll say, but simply thinking about a couple of topics you'd like to discuss, one thing you want to share, and one question you could ask. This small act can boost your confidence and give you something to fall back on if the conversation stalls. Imagine you're meeting a new classmate. Before you say hello, quickly think, "I could talk about the school play or the soccer team." I want to mention, "I just finished a good book." I'll ask them what their favorite subject is. This simple prep work can make a big difference. Duhigg then dives into how to listen for clues during a conversation. It's not just about hearing the words someone says, but observing their body language. Do they lean in, make eye contact, and nod along? These are signs of engagement. Conversely, if someone becomes quiet, avoids eye contact, or seems lost in thought, they might be trying to steer the conversation in a different direction. It's like reading between the lines. Paying attention to what isn't said can be just as important as what is. Finally, Duhigg introduces the idea of experimenting with different topics and approaches. If your initial attempt to discuss something is met with resistance, don't give up. Try a different angle, tell a story, or ask an unexpected question. He explains that people often signal their preferences through subtle shifts in conversation, like bringing up a new topic out of the blue. Recognizing these signals and adapting accordingly is crucial. For example, if someone starts talking about their weekend plans after you mention a work problem, they might be signaling a desire to shift to a lighter, more positive topic. By being observant and willing to experiment, we can navigate these conversational currents and build stronger connections. Ultimately, Duhigg argues that mastering these skills transforms communication from a simple exchange of words into a powerful tool for understanding and connection. The "How do we feel" conversation. Charles Duhigg believes that all conversations, even the ones that seem to be about everyday things, are really about how people are feeling. He explains that emotions are a huge part of how we talk to each other and how we understand what others are saying. It's like there's a hidden question in every chat: how do we feel? We don't always notice it, but it's always there, guiding what we say and how we react. Think about a time you were really excited about something and tried to tell a friend. You probably didn't just state the facts. You used a lot of energy and maybe even jumped around a bit. That's your emotion showing. Duhigg points out that being a good listener is super important when talking about feelings. It's not just about hearing the words someone says, but also noticing if they seem sad, scared, or unsure, even if they don't say it directly. He uses the idea that good listening can unlock hidden parts of a person's thoughts and feelings. Imagine a friend tells you they're fine after failing a test, but their voice is shaky and they avoid eye contact. A good listener would pick up on those clues and realize they're probably not fine at all. The author dedicates the next few parts of his work to helping people get better at these emotional conversations. He wants to teach readers how to really hear what someone is saying, even the things they don't say out loud. He explains that our bodies talk too, through our voices, how we stand, and our facial expressions. Recognizing these cues is a key part of understanding how someone truly feels. For example, someone crossing their arms might be feeling defensive, even if they're saying they agree with you. Duhigg also believes that understanding emotions can help us solve problems and avoid arguments. When we create a safe space for people to share their feelings, it's easier to work through disagreements. This is true whether you're talking face-to-face or online. He suggests that being able to talk about emotions is a kind of superpower because it helps us connect with others on a deeper level. It's about building trust and understanding, which are essential for strong relationships and successful teamwork. Ultimately, Duhigg argues that being able to express and understand feelings is key to truly connecting with the people around us. Chapter 3: The Listening Cure. Charles Duhigg begins by painting a picture of a very specific group of people: wealthy hedge fund managers. These are folks who make a living by predicting the future of money, and they're used to talking to important people and gathering information. They're experts at conversation, or so you'd think. But Duhigg explains that even these professionals recognize that really listening, truly understanding what someone is saying and feeling, can be the difference between making millions and losing them. He introduces us to Nicholas Epley, a psychology professor brought in to help these investors improve their listening skills. The surprising thing is that Epley doesn't offer typical listening advice like make eye contact or nod your head. He argues those things don't actually help us connect. Instead, he believes we already know how to listen when something interests us. Think about a captivating podcast or a funny story. You don't have to force yourself to pay attention. Epley's idea is that the key to better listening isn't about how we listen, but about making conversations more interesting, and that often means talking about feelings. When people share their emotions, Duhigg explains, it naturally draws us in and makes us listen more closely. Imagine a friend telling you about a tough day. You're more likely to really hear them out than if they just talked about the weather. Duhigg illustrates this with a story about a hedge fund manager who lost $20 million because he missed subtle cues during a lunch meeting. The broker he was talking to seemed off, distracted, and even a little agitated, but the investor didn't pick up on those signals. If he had asked how the broker was feeling, Duhigg suggests, he might have discovered the broker's firm was in trouble and avoided a costly mistake. This highlights how easily we can miss important information when we don't pay attention to the emotional undercurrent of a conversation. The author then delves into the work of Elaine and Arthur Aaron, psychologists who conducted a fascinating experiment. They paired up strangers and had them ask each other a series of increasingly personal questions. The results were remarkable. A significant number of these strangers ended up forming close bonds, even dating and marrying each other. Duhigg emphasizes that the key wasn't just asking questions, but asking the right kind of questions, ones that encouraged vulnerability and self-disclosure. It's not about asking, what do you do for a living? But rather, what's something you're really proud of? Or what's a time you felt truly vulnerable? Duhigg explains that these deeper questions tap into a powerful neurological process. When we share our feelings, we trigger something called emotional contagion, where others unconsciously start to feel what we're feeling. This creates a sense of connection and trust. He uses the example of his own experience with a counselor, who didn't offer advice, but instead asked questions that forced him to confront his own emotions and behaviors. This, Duhigg argues, was far more effective than simply being told what to do. The author points out that we often avoid emotional conversations because we fear awkwardness or judgment. But Duhigg suggests that vulnerability is actually a strength. When we're willing to be open and honest about our feelings, we invite others to do the same, creating a space for genuine connection. He contrasts this with simply trying to understand someone by putting ourselves in their shoes, arguing that it's impossible to truly know what another person is experiencing. Instead, we should focus on getting their perspective by asking them to share their inner world. Duhigg concludes by emphasizing that asking questions isn't just about gathering information, it's about building relationships. He shares his own experience interviewing Epley, noting how the professor skillfully redirected the conversation to ask him about his feelings and experiences. This, Duhigg realizes, is the essence of good listening, creating a space where both people feel comfortable sharing their vulnerabilities and connecting on a deeper level. It's a reminder that communication isn't just a skill. It's a superpower, one that can help us navigate our personal and professional lives with greater understanding and empathy. Chapter 4, How Do You Hear Emotions No One Says Aloud? Charles Duhigg explores how we truly understand each other, going beyond just the words people say. He begins with the story of the sitcom, The Big Bang Theory, explaining that the show's creators, Bill Prady and Chuck Lorre, initially struggled to make their characters relatable. The characters were brilliant but socially awkward, unable to easily express or understand feelings. A sitcom needs the audience to feel what the characters are feeling, but these characters were designed to be emotionally closed off. Duhigg explains that we rarely announce our emotions directly. Instead, we show them through body language, tone of voice, and facial expressions, what psychologists call non-linguistic emotional expressions. These cues are a huge part of how we communicate. The writers realized they couldn't have their characters simply tell the audience how they felt, because that's not how real people behave. But they also couldn't have the characters naturally show their feelings, because that wasn't the point of the characters. So they tried contrasting the physicists with more emotionally aware characters, hoping to highlight the differences. However, test audiences were confused. They couldn't connect with the characters because they didn't understand their emotional states. Duhigg emphasizes that a successful sitcom requires the audience to know why characters are doing what they're doing. Are they fighting because they hate each other, or because they secretly love each other? Without understanding the underlying emotions, the jokes fell flat. The writers learned a crucial lesson. You can't make people laugh if they don't know how to feel with the characters. Duhigg then dives into the science of emotional communication, explaining that we're wired to read emotions from infancy. We learn to interpret body language and vocal cues before we even learn to speak. However, as we get older, we tend to rely more on spoken language and can miss these important nonverbal signals. He introduces the work of Terence McGuire, a NASA psychiatrist tasked with identifying astronauts who could handle the stress of long-duration space missions. McGuire realized NASA needed astronauts who were not only smart, but also emotionally intelligent, able to understand and connect with their crewmates in a confined space. McGuire discovered that simply testing for emotional intelligence didn't work. Applicants were too good at saying what they thought the testers wanted to hear. He began analyzing recordings of interviews and noticed something interesting. The most emotionally intelligent candidates were the ones who naturally matched his laughter. They didn't just say, "ha ha," they laughed with the same energy and enthusiasm. This led him to focus on mood and energy, whether someone seemed positive or negative, and whether they were high or low energy. Duhigg explains that we quickly assess these two things when we meet someone. It's a survival mechanism. It helps us decide if someone is a friend or a threat. Matching someone's mood and energy is a way of showing that we understand them and want to connect. It's not about mimicking them exactly, but about demonstrating empathy and alignment. Think about comforting a friend who is sad. You might not cry with them, but you'll likely lower your voice and offer a gentle touch to show you care. Duhigg uses the example of laughter to illustrate this point. We often laugh not because something is particularly funny, but to signal connection. A genuine laugh is contagious, and when we laugh together with similar energy, it strengthens our bond. He contrasts this with a forced laugh, which feels insincere and creates distance. Returning to The Big Bang Theory, Duhigg explains how the writers finally cracked the code by focusing on these subtle cues. In the revised pilot, the characters repeatedly say hi to each other, but their energy and mood reveal their awkwardness and eagerness to connect. The audience understands what they're feeling even though the characters aren't explicitly expressing it. The show's success, Duhigg argues, came from its ability to portray relatable characters who were trying to connect, even if they weren't very good at it. Ultimately, Duhigg suggests that emotional intelligence is a skill we can all develop. By paying attention to nonverbal cues, matching mood and energy, and genuinely trying to understand others' feelings, we can build stronger relationships and communicate more effectively. It's about showing people that we're listening, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. Chapter 5, Connecting Amid Conflict. Charles Duhigg begins this exploration with a powerful story. Melanie Jeffcoat's experience during a school shooting in 1982, and then again when her daughter faced a lockdown drill decades later. These events propelled Jeffcoat into activism, specifically gun control, and eventually led her to a surprising invitation, a conversation with people who held opposing views. Duhigg uses this as a jumping-off point to discuss how incredibly difficult it is to truly connect with those we disagree with, especially in today's polarized world. He points out that anger towards opposing political parties is at an all-time high, and many people now view those with different beliefs as fundamentally flawed. Duhigg explains that conflict is a natural part of life, but we seem to have forgotten how to navigate it constructively. He introduces the idea that simply asking questions and listening isn't always enough, especially when dealing with deeply held beliefs. The author highlights the work of Sheila Heen, a Harvard law professor, who argues that the goal of a conversation isn't to win, but to understand why the conflict exists. Heen's research shows that every conflict has two layers: the surface issue and the underlying emotional conflict. For example, a couple arguing about having another child isn't just debating logistics. They're grappling with fears about finances, career sacrifices, or feeling unheard. Ignoring these emotions prevents real resolution. Duhigg details the experiment organized by Advance Local, a media company, which brought together gun control advocates and gun rights supporters. The goal wasn't to change minds, but to see if civil conversation was even possible. The organizers, guided by Heen's work, focused on teaching specific communication skills. A key technique was looping for understanding, which involves actively listening, summarizing what you've heard, and asking for confirmation that you've understood correctly. This isn't about agreeing, but about proving you've genuinely heard the other person's perspective. Duhigg illustrates this with the example of David Preston, a veteran and gun owner, sharing his story of childhood trauma and finding validation in a conversation with a gun control activist. The author explains that proving you're listening creates a sense of psychological safety, allowing people to be vulnerable and share their true feelings. Duhigg emphasizes that people often struggle to express their emotions during conflict, fearing it will be seen as weakness or used against them. However, Heen's research shows that emotions always leak out, even if unspoken, and ignoring them prevents understanding. The key is to create an environment where people feel safe enough to share those emotions. Duhigg then shifts to the challenges the group faced when the conversation moved online. While the in-person training had been successful, the online forum quickly devolved into arguments and accusations. This led the organizers to focus on helping participants control their own reactions, their environment, and the boundaries of the conflict. Duhigg draws a parallel to research on marriage, conducted by the Love Shrinks, a group of psychologists who discovered that successful couples don't necessarily avoid conflict, but they focus on controlling themselves and the situation rather than trying to control each other. The author explains that unhappy couples often get stuck in cycles of trying to control their partner, while happy couples focus on managing their own emotions and keeping the conflict contained. This principle applies to any disagreement. Focusing on what you can control, your reactions, your language, the scope of the discussion can de-escalate tension and create space for understanding. Duhigg concludes by highlighting how, even within a deeply divided group, genuine connections can form when people prioritize listening, empathy, and a shared commitment to controlling the conversation constructively. The experiment wasn't a complete success, but it offered valuable lessons about the power of communication and the possibility of bridging even the widest divides. A Guide to Using These Ideas, Part 3. Charles Duhigg explains that emotions are a huge part of every conversation, even if we don't talk about them. It's like an invisible force that can help us connect with others or get in the way. He believes a really good conversation tries to bring those feelings out into the open. Duhigg calls this a "how do we feel" conversation, and it often starts with asking a thoughtful question. These aren't simple questions like, "What did you do today?" Instead, they're deep questions that ask about someone's beliefs, values, or experiences. For example, instead of asking, "Where do you work?" you could ask, "What's the best part of your job?" This encourages someone to share why they feel a certain way, not just what happened. Duhigg points out that even simple questions like, "Tell me about your family," can become deep if they lead to someone talking about what makes them proud or worried. He suggests imagining you're talking to a close friend before you speak. What would you ask them? When someone does share their feelings, it's important to really listen, not just to the words they say, but also how they say them. Duhigg explains that we need to pay attention to their tone of voice, body language, and energy levels. Are they speaking quickly and excitedly, or slowly and sadly? Are they upbeat or glum? Understanding these clues helps us understand what they're truly feeling. It's easy to misinterpret things. Someone might seem frustrated when they're actually angry, or quiet when they're sad, so paying close attention is key. Duhigg introduces a technique called looping for understanding. It's a way to make sure you've really heard what someone is saying. First, you ask questions to clarify. Then, you repeat back what you heard in your own words. Finally, you ask if you got it right. You keep doing this until everyone agrees they understand each other. This isn't just about repeating words. It's about showing the other person you're trying to see things from their perspective. This builds trust and encourages them to share more. Duhigg emphasizes that showing you want to hear is just as important as actually hearing. He explains that responding to someone's vulnerability isn't about sharing your own similar stories right away. If someone tells you they've been diagnosed with cancer, you shouldn't immediately talk about your own aches and pains. That takes the focus off them. Instead, you should offer empathetic support, acknowledge their feelings, and ask them to tell you more. You can show you care by looping for understanding, asking what they need, comfort, advice, or just someone to listen, and asking permission before sharing your own experiences. It's about being emotionally available and responding to their needs. Duhigg also discusses how these ideas apply to conflicts. He says that during a fight, it's even more important to talk about how everyone is feeling. He suggests acknowledging understanding by looping, finding points of agreement, and using softer language. Instead of saying you're always wrong, try saying, I somewhat disagree with that. The goal isn't to win the argument, but to understand each other. Finally, Duhigg addresses how communication changes online. He points out that online, we miss out on important cues like tone of voice and body language. Because of this, it's even more important to be polite, avoid sarcasm, and express gratitude. Sarcasm can easily be misinterpreted in text, and a simple thank you can go a long way. He also advises against criticizing people publicly online, as it can create a negative environment. Duhigg believes that a little extra care and thought can make a big difference in online conversations, helping us connect with others even without the benefit of face-to-face interaction. The Who Are We conversation. Charles Duhigg explains that when people talk, they don't just share ideas, they share who they are. Every conversation is colored by a person's past, their family, their friends, and everything they believe in. It's like bringing a whole backpack of experiences to every chat. Duhigg points out that often, conversations are about these things, who we know, how we fit into groups, and how our relationships shape us. Think about catching up with a friend and spending the whole time talking about your families or shared hobbies. That's a who are we? Conversation in action. The author emphasizes that understanding these social identities is especially important now. Recent events have shown us that unfairness and prejudice still exist, and they affect people in different ways. Duhigg believes that talking about our differences isn't always easy, but it's a necessary step towards making things better. It's like trying to solve a puzzle. You need to see all the pieces, even the ones that don't immediately seem to fit, to get the full picture. Duhigg suggests that humans are naturally inclined to trust people who are similar to them and be wary of those who aren't. This is a leftover instinct from our ancestors, who relied on their tribes for safety. However, he argues that we can choose to overcome this instinct and connect with people even when we come from different backgrounds. Imagine meeting someone with very different political views. Instead of immediately dismissing them, you could try to understand why they believe what they do. That's using communication as a superpower to build bridges. The author also highlights that some conversations are particularly difficult, like those about unfair systems or historical injustices. These conversations require extra care and thoughtfulness. Duhigg suggests thinking about how these conversations should happen, not just what is said. For example, instead of accusing someone of being prejudiced, you might ask them to explain their perspective. This creates a safer space for honest dialogue. Ultimately, Duhigg, drawing on the words of Otter Lord, believes that our differences aren't what cause problems. It's our failure to appreciate them. Recognizing, accepting, and even celebrating what makes each of us unique is what makes the world a more interesting and vibrant place. He frames communication not just as a way to exchange information, but as a powerful tool for understanding, connection, and positive change. It's a superpower we all have, and one we can learn to use more effectively. Chapter 6: Our Social Identities Shape Our Worlds. Charles Duhigg explores how our sense of who we are, our social identities, deeply affects how we connect with others, and why truly understanding this can be a powerful tool for communication. He begins with the story of Dr. J. Rosenblum, a pediatrician who quickly realized simply telling parents vaccines were safe wasn't working. Parents held strong beliefs, often fueled by misinformation, and a doctor's authority wasn't enough to change their minds. Rosenblum's initial attempts to overwhelm parents with data backfired. They dug in their heels even further. This illustrates a key point: facts alone rarely change deeply held beliefs. Duhigg explains that our social identities are how we see ourselves as part of groups, whether it's based on race, religion, political beliefs, or even lifestyle choices. These identities aren't just labels, they're core to how we understand the world and our place in it. Experiments, like the famous summer camp study, where boys divided into teams quickly developed intense loyalty and hostility towards the other group, show how easily we form us versus them mentalities. This tendency to favor our in-group and view others with suspicion can make conversations incredibly difficult, especially when dealing with sensitive topics. The author highlights that these social impulses aren't necessarily bad. They evolved because belonging to a group was crucial for survival. However, they can also lead to prejudice and misunderstanding. Duhigg introduces the idea of a "who are we?" conversation, the ongoing process of figuring out our connections within society. These conversations happen constantly, from casual gossip to defining our political affiliations. They help us bond, but can also create divisions. The challenge is that some identities are more powerful than others in certain situations. A doctor's authority, for example, might be strong in a clinic, but irrelevant at a political rally. Duhigg uses Rosenblum's experience to illustrate how these dynamics play out in real life. He discovered that anti-vaxxers weren't a homogeneous group of conspiracy theorists. Instead, they came from diverse backgrounds: liberals, conservatives, libertarians, united by a distrust of authority or a desire for control over their health. This realization led Rosenblum to understand that simply presenting facts wouldn't work. He needed to understand why these parents felt the way they did and connect with them on a human level. The author introduces the concept of stereotype threat, explaining how awareness of negative stereotypes can actually undermine performance. Studies showed that women performed worse on math tests when reminded of the stereotype that women aren't as good at math. This is because the stereotype creates anxiety and self-doubt. Duhigg then connects this to the work of researchers who found that reminding people of all their identities, not just the ones associated with stereotypes, can lessen this effect. This is because it broadens their self-perception and reduces the power of any single negative label. Duhigg draws a parallel to a remarkable experiment in Karakash, Iraq, where a soccer league was created to bring together Christians and Muslims after years of conflict. The league's success wasn't just about playing soccer, it was about how the league was structured. By giving players multiple roles, goalkeeper, team captain, friend, it encouraged them to see each other as individuals, rather than simply as members of opposing religious groups. The league fostered a sense of shared identity and common purpose, breaking down barriers and building trust. The author emphasizes 3 key elements for successful communication: acknowledging multiple identities, ensuring equal footing, and finding shared connections. It's about recognizing that everyone is complex and multifaceted, and creating a space where everyone feels valued and respected. Duhigg illustrates this with Rosenblum's approach to talking to vaccine-hesitant parents. Instead of lecturing, he asked questions, listened to their concerns, and sought common ground. He discovered that by understanding their values and beliefs, he could gently guide them towards considering vaccination. Ultimately, Duhigg argues that effective communication isn't about winning an argument or proving someone wrong. It's about building bridges, fostering understanding, and recognizing our shared humanity. It's about remembering that we all have multiple identities, and that those identities shape how we see the world and how we connect with others. This understanding, he suggests, is a superpower that can help us navigate even the most challenging conversations. Chapter 7: How do we make the hardest conversations safer? Charles Duhigg explores how tricky it can be to talk about who we are, our backgrounds, beliefs, and identities, and why getting better at these conversations is incredibly important. He begins with a story about Netflix, a company known for its unusual no-rules culture. In 2018, a leader at Netflix used a hurtful word during a meeting, sparking a huge debate about what was okay to say and how to handle sensitive topics. This incident revealed that even in a company that encouraged open communication, talking about identity could be dangerous. Duhigg explains that Netflix was founded on the idea that fewer rules are better, allowing employees a lot of freedom. However, this freedom led to a culture of radical honesty, where people were expected to challenge each other constantly, sometimes harshly. While this could be effective, it also created a space where it was easy to accidentally offend or hurt someone, especially when discussing sensitive topics like race or gender. The author highlights that the company's approach, while intending to foster openness, lacked the necessary guidance for navigating these complex conversations. The author then dives into why these, who are we, conversations are so difficult. He explains that many companies try to improve diversity and inclusion through training programs, but these often don't work well. Research shows that these programs rarely have a lasting impact and can sometimes even make things worse. Duhigg points out that people often avoid these conversations because they fear saying the wrong thing or causing offense. This fear stems from something called identity threat, where someone says something that makes another person feel like their identity is being attacked or dismissed. For example, if someone says, "You're rich, so you wouldn't understand," it puts the person into a group they might not identify with and can feel very hurtful. Duhigg shares research showing that identity threats are surprisingly common. Most people experience them multiple times a week. These threats make people feel defensive and shut down communication. To understand how to improve these conversations, Duhigg discusses a study where researchers asked people to talk about their experiences with race. They found that simply preparing for the conversation beforehand, acknowledging it might be awkward, thinking about potential obstacles, and planning how to overcome them made a big difference. This preparation helped people feel more comfortable and open to discussing difficult topics. The author emphasizes that it's important to avoid generalizations and focus on personal experiences. Instead of saying all lawyers are dishonest, it's better to say, "I had a negative experience with a lawyer." Sharing personal stories helps people connect and understand each other's perspectives. Duhigg also notes that listening and acknowledging someone's feelings is crucial. Simply saying, "That sounds really difficult," can go a long way. Returning to the Netflix story, Duhigg explains that when Verna Myers joined the company to lead diversity and inclusion efforts, she realized that Netflix needed some guidelines, even though it was a no-rules culture. These guidelines focused on creating a safe space for conversation, encouraging empathy, and reminding people to think before they speak. Myers and her team emphasized that it was okay to make mistakes, as long as people were willing to learn from them. Duhigg illustrates that Netflix's journey wasn't without challenges. A controversial comedy special by Dave Chappelle sparked protests and internal debate. However, the company had established systems for listening to employees and addressing concerns, which allowed them to navigate the situation more effectively. The author concludes that while conversations about identity will always be difficult, creating a culture of empathy, preparation, and open communication is essential for building a more inclusive and understanding world. Ultimately, Duhigg argues that learning to connect through these conversations is a superpower, allowing us to bridge differences and work together towards a better future. A Guide to Using These Ideas, Part 4. Charles Duhigg explains that having tough talks is a part of life, and often these conversations touch on important things like differences in how people see the world, things like race, gender, or even just different opinions. These talks are hard because people worry about how they'll be seen. For example, if someone gets feedback at work, they might feel like their whole character is being questioned, not just their work. Duhigg points out that these conversations aren't just important, they're unavoidable, so learning to handle them well is a key skill. He emphasizes the importance of thinking about how a conversation might go before it happens. Duhigg suggests asking yourself a few things beforehand. What do you want to achieve with the conversation? What do you hope the other person will say or learn? What might make the conversation go wrong? Will someone get upset or shut down? And if those things happen, what will you do? It's like planning for a trip. You think about what you want to see, but also what you'll do if you get a flat tire. He explains that thinking through these possibilities beforehand can actually make you less anxious when they happen. It's also important to consider why you're having the conversation in the first place. What good could come from it, even if it's uncomfortable? When the conversation starts, Duhigg says it's helpful to set some ground rules. This means agreeing on how you'll treat each other, no blaming, shaming, or attacking. The goal is to share feelings, not decide who's right or wrong. It's also good to ask everyone what they hope to get out of the conversation. Maybe someone wants to feel heard, or maybe they want to come up with a plan. Duhigg stresses that it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and that discomfort can actually be a good thing. If you say something wrong or ask a clumsy question, that's an opportunity to learn and grow. As the conversation continues, Duhigg encourages people to share more about who they are, their backgrounds, their communities, the things they care about. He explains that everyone has many different parts to their identity, and it's helpful to remember that. It's also important to make sure everyone feels like they have an equal voice. Don't brag about your accomplishments or try to dominate the conversation. Instead, try to find common ground. If you both went to the same high school, that's a starting point. But Duhigg warns against fake connections. The connection needs to be real. Even if you don't have much in common, simply acknowledging someone's experience, showing that you've listened, can build trust. Duhigg also points out that the environment matters. Where you have the conversation can affect how safe people feel. A quiet, private setting might be better than a crowded room. Sometimes, just starting with a casual conversation about something unrelated can help people relax. He explains that social identities, things like race, gender, or social class, can feel more or less important depending on the situation. By being mindful of these things and preparing for potential challenges, Duhigg believes we can make difficult conversations a little bit easier and use communication as a real superpower to connect with others. And that brings us to the end of our summary of this book. I hope you found it insightful and valuable. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more. Your support helps us bring you more great content. Thanks for watching.